The storm outside screamed as Emily clutched the letter, her hands trembling like the truth itself was too heavy to hold. Lightning flared, throwing her shadow against the wooden wall, a fragile figure bound to secrets. "Why now?" Emily whispered, the words breaking as thunder answered with a roar. She pressed the parchment to her chest, ink bleeding into her blouse as tears blurred the words that had undone her world. Her breath came in shudders, shallow and uneven, each gasp pulling her deeper into despair. "You knew," she said, her lips trembling. "You always knew and never told me." The grandfather clock ticked in cruel rhythm, its chime a reminder of time lost, years wasted in silence. The room swayed in shadows, candlelight flickering across her face, illuminating anguish she could not contain. The letter slipped from her grip, falling slowly to the floor, fragile as her spirit. In that moment, Emily felt both destroyed and alive, the storm's voice echoing her own grief in merciless harmony. Morning arrived pale and heavy, clouds pressing low against the horizon as Emily sat motionless by her bed. The letter lay discarded on the floor, its edges curled from her restless hands. "It doesn't erase the years," she whispered, her voice thin as ash. She rose slowly, pulling her shawl around her shoulders, each movement sluggish, her body stiff with exhaustion. The air carried the damp scent of rain, grounding her to the earth, even as her mind reeled. She stared into the mirror, her reflection staring back with eyes swollen and hollow, but behind them burned a quiet fury. "You stole my choice," Emily muttered, the words cutting her lips as though they were blades. Her chest rose unevenly, each breath dragging the weight of a secret she never asked to bear. The room seemed both too small and too vast, trapping her in silence. She closed her eyes, clutching herself tightly, bracing for a day already too heavy to endure. The kitchen was silent, except for the faint drip of rain from the roof. Emily sat at the table, untouched tea cooling before her. She traced circles in the wood, her mind replaying the words she wished she could forget. "How do you move forward when everything behind you was built on a lie?" she asked the empty air. The silence answered, heavier than any voice could. The walls seemed to lean in, carrying echoes of laughter long gone, memories now soured with betrayal. Her throat tightened, and she pushed the cup away, the clink ringing too sharp in the stillness. She leaned forward, covering her face with her hands, shoulders heaving as she fought to breathe. The storm had passed outside, but within her chaos still reigned, a storm no light could pierce. Emily stepped into the parlor where the old piano stood, its keys yellowed with time. She touched the surface, remembering when her mother's laughter filled the room with music. The memory stabbed her heart, bitter and sweet. She pressed a single note, the sound hollow in the empty house. "What was real?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling as she searched for answers in echoes. Her hand lingered over the ivory, but her body shook, and she withdrew, unable to bear the weight of memory. She sank onto the sofa, staring at the silent piano as though it carried judgment. The storm outside had ended, but her soul was trapped in yesterday's fury, a prisoner to a truth she could not undo. By evening, the house was quiet except for the distant call of crows. Emily sat near the fireplace, though no fire burned. Her shawl wrapped tightly around her, she stared into the empty hearth, eyes glassy with thought. "If I am to survive this truth, I must face it," she whispered, determination buried beneath sorrow. Her lips trembled, but resolve flickered faintly, fragile yet real. She thought of her confidant, the one person who never abandoned her, and wondered if she had the strength to share this wound. The shadows danced in the fading light, stretching across the floor like silent companions to her grief. She hugged herself, rocking slightly, as though trying to steady her heart against the waves of despair. The silence pressed closer, but inside her a spark stirred, the beginning of something unyielding. The rain had ended, leaving the air heavy with damp earth and fading thunder. Emily sat on the porch, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for answers in the gray distance. The letter rested in her lap, folded yet still sharp as a blade against her soul. "You cannot undo the past," she whispered, though her voice sounded hollow in the silence. She pressed her palm against her chest, grounding herself against the ache. The rocking chair creaked beneath her as the wind stirred, carrying whispers of memory. She thought of her mother's voice, of the warmth she lost, and her eyes brimmed again with tears. The world outside seemed calm, but inside her storm still churned, restless and unforgiving. "I need to know why," Emily said, her breath breaking on the words. Resolve flickered faintly, fragile but real, as she rose from the chair. The day was heavy with sorrow, but also with the weight of a choice she could no longer avoid. Emily walked through the narrow lane toward the village, each step heavy with hesitation. The ground was damp, her shoes darkened by mud, the scent of rain lingering. She carried the letter in her hand, its edges frayed from her grip. "This truth cannot stay hidden," she muttered, though fear coiled in her stomach. The houses stood quietly, smoke rising from chimneys, lives untouched by her private storm. She lowered her eyes, unsure if she could meet the world with the weight of betrayal pressing on her chest. At the square she paused, staring at the stone fountain, its water rippling gently, a stark contrast to the chaos within her. "I am not the same," she whispered to herself, her reflection trembling in the water's surface. The air felt colder than the morning, pressing against her skin, urging her forward, and holding her back all at once. She tightened her grip on the letter, bracing for the conversations she feared. Inside the small chapel, Emily stood before Father Samuel, her hands trembling as she offered him the letter. His brow furrowed as he glanced at her, eyes filled with quiet concern. "What burdens you, child?" he asked softly. Emily struggled to speak, her throat tight, her heart pounding against her ribs. "It changes everything I thought I knew," she whispered, unable to meet his gaze. The candles flickered along the altar, their light stretching shadows across the wooden walls. Father Samuel's voice was steady, calm as still water. "Sometimes truth feels like ruin, but it can also become release." Emily's tears broke free, sliding down her cheeks as she clutched the letter tighter. Her knees weakened, and she sank onto the pew, sobs echoing through the silence. "I don't know how to forgive," she admitted, voice breaking with despair. Father Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder, not with answers, but with presence, anchoring her pain. Emily left the chapel with eyes swollen but spirit steadier, the echo of Father Samuel's words still in her ears. The road stretched before her, quiet yet daunting, lined with dripping trees. She stopped near the old bridge, its stones slick with rain, the river below swollen and rushing. "Am I strong enough?" she asked herself, the wind carrying her words away. Her fingers ran across the rough stone, grounding her against the torrent of thoughts. The bridge had carried her many times, but never had it felt like a crossing into something unknown. She breathed deeply, chest rising against the weight pressing her down, and for the first time she did not turn back. "I will face it," she whispered, the words trembling but clear. She stepped forward slowly, each movement echoing like a vow to herself. The storm inside her did not end, but it shifted, opening space for courage to grow. As evening fell, Emily found herself at the doorstep of Anna's cottage, her confidant who had always stood by her side. The candlelight glowed warmly from the window, a stark contrast to the storm that lived inside her. Emily raised her hand to knock, but froze, her heart hammering with fear. "Will she see me differently when she knows?" she whispered, her voice trembling with doubt. Memories of Anna's laughter filled her mind, the comfort of her embrace, the safety she had always provided. Emily pressed her hand against the doorframe, struggling against the urge to flee. The truth pressed in her chest like a weight that would not let go. Finally, with shaking breath, she knocked, the sound fragile in the night air. The door creaked open, and Anna's face appeared, eyes filled with warmth that cut through the shadows. "Emily," Anna said softly, and Emily's tears broke before a single word could be spoken. The cottage smelled faintly of herbs and burning wood, but Emily felt no warmth as she sat before Anna. Her hands twisted in her lap, restless, betraying the storm inside. "I cannot carry this alone anymore," Emily whispered, her voice breaking like glass. Anna leaned closer, her eyes steady, searching Emily's face for the truth behind her trembling words. "What have you discovered?" Anna asked softly, her voice gentle but edged with worry. Emily opened the letter again, her hands shaking as though it still burned her skin. The ink smeared, but the message was carved deep into her soul. "Everything I believed about my family, it was a lie." The confession fell heavy between them, silencing the room. Anna reached across, her hand covering Emily's, grounding her with quiet strength. The fire cracked in the hearth, but Emily felt only the cold weight of betrayal pressing harder on her chest. Emily's confession hung in the air like smoke, heavy and inescapable. She stared into Anna's kind eyes, but shame gnawed at her. "How do I face the world, knowing the foundation of my life was deceit?" she asked, her voice breaking in waves. Anna's grip on her hand did not falter. "You face it because it's yours to live, not theirs to control." Emily blinked, startled by the firmness beneath Anna's softness. "But it feels like drowning," Emily whispered, tears spilling freely. Anna pulled her into an embrace, her arms a shield against the storm inside. "Then let me carry you until you can swim," Anna murmured. Emily sobbed into her friend's shoulder, her breath ragged, but in that closeness a fragile thread of hope began to weave itself. For the first time since the letter, she did not feel utterly alone. Later that night, Emily walked back home, the sky black velvet scattered with faint stars. Her footsteps echoed softly against the damp road. The letter pressed against her chest beneath her shawl, its weight both anchor and burden. "What will they think of me when the truth comes out?" she whispered into the empty night. The wind rustled through trees, carrying no answers, only shadows. Each step forward felt like trespass into unknown territory. She paused at the bridge, staring at the swollen river, reflecting shards of moonlight. Her reflection stared back, distorted, fragile, unrecognizable. "I am not who I thought I was," Emily said, her voice trembling, the admission shaking her to the core. She tightened her shawl around her, the night pressing cold against her skin, but inside she felt a flicker of defiance. At dawn, Emily sought out the village path where the mentor often walked, hoping for guidance. She found him near the edge of the orchard, staff in hand, gaze lifted to the horizon. "You look burdened," Thomas said gently, his voice calm as the morning air. Emily lowered her head, clutching the letter. "Everything I thought I knew was a lie, and I cannot breathe beneath it." Thomas studied her with eyes weathered by wisdom, then placed his hand on her shoulder. "Truth does not destroy you, Emily, it reveals you. The pain you feel is the breaking of old chains." She fought tears, the words stirring something fragile inside her. "But I do not know how to move forward," she whispered. Thomas smiled faintly, his voice steady. "Step by step. Courage is not absence of fear, but the will to keep walking." Emily returned home with Thomas's words echoing in her mind, though doubt still clung to her like a shadow. She entered the house, its silence pressing down like judgment. The piano sat untouched in the parlor, its keys yellowed with age. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface, trembling. "Show me the strength within," she whispered to herself, as if daring her own soul to awaken. Her reflection in the piano's polished wood was faint, almost unrecognizable, but it stared back with quiet defiance. The silence of the house felt suffocating, but Emily took a seat, pressing a single note. The sound rang hollow, yet real, a fragile thread pulling her toward herself again. For the first time she felt the possibility of rising, even in the midst of betrayal's ashes. Emily's hands shook as she unfolded the second letter she had found hidden in the drawer of her mother's desk. The words stabbed sharper than the first, revealing secrets buried beneath years of silence. "You left me with lies," she whispered, her throat closing around the words. Her breath came in ragged bursts as she read of betrayals she never imagined, names that shifted everything she believed about her past. The fire in the hearth hissed as though echoing her pain, shadows dancing against the walls like silent accusers. Her chest tightened until she pressed her palm against it, desperate for air. "Was I ever truly loved?" she cried out, her voice cracking into the emptiness. The house groaned under the storm's lingering weight, the truth heavier than the night itself. Her tears blurred the ink, but the words were already carved into her memory, cruel and unforgiving. Morning came with a gray, merciless light, and Emily carried the second letter to Anna's cottage. She clutched it so tightly, her knuckles whitened, the paper nearly crumpling beneath her grip. Anna opened the door, her face soft with worry, as Emily stepped inside. "It wasn't just one lie," Emily said, her voice trembling. "It was everything." She handed the letter to Anna, watching her friend's eyes scan the page with growing sorrow. Anna's lips parted as if to speak, but silence fell between them like a curtain. Emily sank into the chair, her body trembling under the weight of revelation. "I do not know who I am anymore," she confessed, her voice cracking like broken glass. Anna knelt before her, hands firm on Emily's, her gaze steady. "You are still yourself," Anna said softly, "even if the truth feels like it's tearing you apart." Later that day, Emily found herself in the village square, the letter still weighing on her soul. She saw Richard, her estranged uncle, standing near the fountain, his posture rigid, his eyes shadowed by guilt. "You knew," Emily said, her voice trembling with fury. Richard turned slowly, his jaw tightening. "It was not mine to tell," he answered, his words sharp but laced with regret. Emily's hands shook at her sides, rage and sorrow clashing within her. "You let me live in shadows while you held the light," she said, her breath ragged. The fountain's water rippled behind them, its calm mocking the storm in her heart. Richard lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "We were all broken," he muttered, his voice heavy with shame. The silence that followed pressed hard between them, an ocean of betrayal neither knew how to cross. Emily stormed back across the bridge, her heart pounding with the echo of Richard's words. The river surged below, carrying away the weight of rain and memory alike. She stopped at the center, gripping the stone railing with white knuckles. "Why was I the one left in the dark?" she shouted into the rushing water, her voice breaking. The wind whipped her hair across her face, her tears stinging as they fell into the torrent. Her whole body shook as grief and rage collided, an unrelenting storm within her chest. "I cannot forgive you," she cried, though the river swallowed her word. Yet even as her voice faltered, she felt the faintest flicker of strength in speaking them aloud. For the first time her anguish had a voice, no longer locked away in silence. Night fell heavy, and Emily sat alone in her parlor, the fire burned down to embers. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint crackle of dying wood. She stared at the letters spread across the table, the truth staring back at her like unblinking eyes. Her hands pressed against her temples, as though to hold her world together. "I do not know if I can heal from this," she whispered, her voice hollow. Shadows clung to the corners, pressing closer with each flicker of light. She thought of Anna, of Thomas, of Richard, and the tangled web of their choices. "I am not the sum of their lies," Emily said, her breath shaking but firm. The words surprised her, soft yet fierce, the beginning of something unbreakable. For the first time, the darkness did not feel eternal. The house felt like a prison that night, walls pressing in on Emily as the letters spread across the table like open wounds. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking gently, trying to quiet the storm inside. The fire had died, leaving only shadows that seemed to breathe with her despair. "I am drowning," Emily whispered, the words breaking as they left her lips. She stumbled toward the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. Outside, the moon cast a pale light over the fields, indifferent to her grief. "Will I ever be whole again?" she asked, but the silence gave her nothing. Her body shook with sobs until she sank to the floor, clutching herself tightly, her tears soaking the wooden boards. For the first time, she felt truly broken, the pieces of herself scattered beyond reach, and the night seemed endless. By morning, Emily found Anna waiting at her doorstep, worry etched across her features. Without a word, Anna stepped inside, wrapping Emily in an embrace that dissolved her fragile defenses. Emily's body trembled in her friend's arms, sobs breaking like waves. "I cannot carry this," Emily whispered, voice raw. "It is too heavy." Anna pulled back, her hands firm on Emily's shoulders, eyes fierce. "Then let me carry it with you," she said, her tone both soft and unyielding. Emily's tears flowed freely, but the warmth of Anna's presence eased the weight pressing on her chest. The house, though dim, seemed less suffocating with Anna beside her. "You are not alone," Anna murmured, and for the first time in days, Emily dared to believe it might be true. Her grief remained, but in Anna's embrace, hope flickered faintly like a fragile flame. That afternoon, Emily returned to the chapel, her steps unsteady but driven by something deeper than fear. Father Samuel waited near the altar, his calm presence filling the silent space. Emily knelt before him, clutching the letters as if they might shatter in her hands. "I cannot forgive them," she confessed, her voice thick with tears, "and I cannot forgive myself for believing their lies." Samuel's expression softened, his voice low and steady. "Forgiveness is not forgetting, Emily. It is choosing not to be bound by the pain." She trembled, her body leaning against the pew as though it might hold her upright. "But I do not know how," she whispered. Samuel placed his hand gently over hers, his eyes steady. "You begin by giving yourself permission to heal." The chapel's silence wrapped around her like fragile protection, a sanctuary for her fractured soul. The river roared beneath the bridge as Emily leaned against its stone railing, the letters held tightly in her hand. The current surged, wild and unrelenting, mirroring her turmoil. "If I let them go, will I find peace?" she asked aloud, her voice trembling with doubt. The wind whipped her hair across her face, her eyes stinging with tears. She raised the letters, holding them above the water, her hands shaking with the weight of the choice. Memories flooded her, of love, of laughter, of lies that burned those memories to ash. Her body trembled as she closed her eyes, her breath breaking. Slowly, she lowered the letters back to her chest, unable to release them yet. "Not today," she whispered, determination and pain intertwining. The river thundered on, a relentless reminder that her journey was not over, but neither was her strength. That night, Emily sat before the cold fireplace, her body exhausted, but her spirit flickering with something new. She placed the letters on the table and stared at them, her eyes steady despite the tears that still came. "You no longer own me," she whispered, the words trembling but true. She pressed her hand to her heart, feeling its broken rhythm still fighting to beat. Shadows stretched long across the room, but they no longer seemed as suffocating as before. She thought of Anna, of Thomas, of Samuel, each voice a thread weaving her back together. "I will rise," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "even if I rise in pieces." The silence of the house did not crush her this time, it listened, bearing witness to her vow. The night remained heavy, but within her, a fragile spark of defiance burned against the dark. Emily confronted Richard again at the edge of the square, her hands trembling, but her voice steadier than before. "You carried the truth and let me suffer in the dark," she said, her tone sharp with pain. Richard's jaw clenched, his eyes clouded with shame. "I thought silence would protect you," he answered, his voice low and brittle. Emily shook her head, anger and sorrow colliding in her chest. "Silence destroyed me," she cried, the words echoing against stone walls. Her tears fell, but she did not falter, standing taller despite her breaking heart. Richard reached out, his hand hovering, but she stepped back, unwilling to allow the gesture. "You chose fear over love," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. The weight of her words lingered, heavy as thunder before a storm. For the first time, she felt her strength rise, even as grief burned within. Emily left Richard behind, her steps unsteady as she made her way to the riverbank. The water churned violently, reflecting the storm inside her chest. She clutched the letters, her knuckles white, her breath sharp. "I am not your prisoner anymore," she whispered, her words torn by the rushing current. She raised the letters high, her whole body shaking, fear and freedom warring in her veins. Lightning split the sky, the wind lashing her hair across her face. She closed her eyes, her lips trembling as she cried, "You do not define me. and with trembling resolve, she let them fall. The papers fluttered like broken wings before sinking into the torrent below. Emily fell to her knees, her sobs mixing with the roar of the river. But in the release, a weight lifted, fragile yet undeniable. The storm eased by nightfall, leaving Emily drenched but unbroken. She returned to her house, her body trembling from exhaustion. The rooms echoed with silence, yet they no longer crushed her spirit. She walked to the piano and pressed her fingers onto the keys, her hands still shaking. The sound was imperfect, a wavering note that broke into silence. "I am still here," she whispered, the words soft yet full of power. Her reflection in the polished wood showed her face streaked with tears, but her eyes carried something new: defiance. She pressed another key, then another, each note clumsy but true. The house seemed to listen, shadows retreating in quiet acceptance. Emily's voice trembled as she said, "I will not vanish into their lies." For the first time, the silence of the house felt like hers, no longer their prison. At dawn, Emily walked to the orchard where Thomas waited, his staff in hand, his eyes steady with patience. She approached slowly, her heart still raw, but courage guided her steps. "I let the letters go," she said, her voice breaking, "but the pain remains." Thomas nodded gently, his gaze kind. "Pain does not vanish, Emily. It becomes the soil where strength can grow." Emily's lips trembled as she asked, "And what if I am too broken to grow?" Thomas placed his hand over hers, his voice firm but tender. "You are not broken. You are becoming." His words settled into her soul like roots finding earth. Emily's tears returned, but they carried release rather than despair. For the first time, she believed healing was possible, even if the road was long. That evening, Emily sat by the hearth, the fire burning bright for the first time in days. Shadows danced across the walls, but they no longer seemed to threaten her. She leaned back in the chair, her body still weary, but her spirit steadier. "I have walked through the storm," she whispered, her words quiet yet fierce. The flames flickered against her face, illuminating her eyes with fragile determination. She thought of Anna, of Samuel, of Thomas, each of them pieces of the strength she was learning to claim. Her voice trembled but did not break. "I am still alive," she said firmly, the words echoing through the silent house. For the first time, silence was not her enemy, but her witness. The night pressed close outside, but inside her heart, the fire glowed with the promise of survival. The morning sun broke through the gray horizon, bathing the fields in golden light. Emily walked slowly through the grass, the dew clinging to her skirt. She breathed deeply, her chest rising with air that no longer felt heavy with sorrow. "I am still here," she whispered, her voice trembling yet alive. Birds sang overhead, their voices sharp against the stillness, as though welcoming her into a world renewed. She touched the petals of a wildflower, her fingers gentle, as if relearning how to feel. The weight of loss lingered, but it no longer crushed her. It shaped her, gave her edges carved by survival. "I choose to live," she said softly, tears warming her cheeks not from despair but from release. The morning air wrapped her like a quiet promise, and for the first time, she believed she could carry herself forward. Emily met Anna in the village square, the fountain's water sparkling in the sun. Anna smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth and relief. "You look lighter," she said, her voice a gentle observation. Emily's lips trembled into a faint smile. "Because I finally let it go." Anna embraced her, the kind of embrace that spoke without words, carrying years of friendship and unshaken loyalty. "You are stronger than you realize," Anna whispered, her breath steady against Emily's ear. Emily's arms tightened, her voice unsteady as she said, "I only survived because you believed in me when I did not." The fountain's ripples caught sunlight, scattering patterns across their faces like a quiet blessing. For the first time, Emily felt the truth of Anna's words not as comfort, but as her own reflection. She was no longer only broken, she was becoming whole. Emily returned to the chapel, her steps steady this time. Father Samuel stood by the altar, his gaze calm as he watched her approach. She knelt, her hands folded loosely, no longer clutching letters but resting in quiet surrender. "I thought healing would mean forgetting," she said softly, her voice steady. "But now I see it means remembering without chains." Samuel's eyes shone with pride as he nodded. "You have found your own strength, Emily." She closed her eyes, the silence of the chapel no longer suffocating but serene. The candles flickered softly, their flames steady in the still air, reflecting her newfound calm. "I will carry the pain," she whispered, "but it will no longer carry me." In that moment, the chapel felt less like a place of confession, and more like a sanctuary of release. At dusk, Emily walked with Thomas along the orchard path, the sky painted in shades of amber and violet. She listened as the leaves rustled in the breeze, each sound softer than before. "You told me I was becoming," she said, glancing at him. Thomas's smile was faint but full of certainty. "And now you see it too." Emily's lips curved into a gentle smile, her eyes shining with quiet determination. "I do," she replied, her voice carrying strength she once thought lost. The orchard stretched endless, its trees bathed in golden light, and for the first time she saw beauty rather than sorrow. Thomas stopped, resting his hand lightly on her shoulder. "Your journey has only begun, but now it is truly yours." Emily exhaled slowly, the breath carrying away the last remnants of despair. That night, Emily sat at her piano once more, the fire burning steady in the heart. She placed her hands on the keys, pressing them gently, the sound fuller, no longer hollow. "I am not lost," she whispered, her eyes glistening as music filled the air. Each note rose softly, fragile yet alive, echoing through the house like a heartbeat. Shadows danced across the walls, but they moved in harmony, no longer her enemies. She smiled faintly, her tears falling without shame, each drop a release rather than a wound. "This is who I am," Emily said quietly, her voice merging with the melody. The music swelled, tender and imperfect, but undeniably hers. For the first time, the silence carried not sorrow but peace. The night outside remained dark, but within Emily's heart beat bright with the promise of tomorrow.